Hey guys, this is gonna be for my persuasive speech. That computer is facing away from me. Here are my cards. So, gun control laws reduce gun deaths. I'm sure you've heard that everywhere. You might not have heard that exact wording, but you've heard the idea, and it's spread very commonly everywhere. Whether that be graffiti, signs, riots, or really anything that's politically motivated. A lot of American citizens and organizations have been pushing the idea that we, the people, have too many guns and that we could save lives with screenings and stricter laws implemented. Mental screenings, I should be specific. Today I'm going to be looking into 3 of the most common arguments that are used to support the idea of stricter gun control and why stricter gun control could be the answer. So my first is going to be the idea that gun control would reduce gun deaths. It's going to be my broadest and sort of simplest one of the 3. And while the statement in and of itself could be true, it's very important to further look into it and further investigate it. So I'm going to start with a stat from procon.org. They said that from 1999 to 2016, there were over 570,000 gun deaths in the US. And that's a brutal number to have to read off a piece of paper. I'm going to be honest with you. But it's important to see these numbers. And to put that into perspective, that would be killing all of the US almost twice. To further expand on that number, 60% of those were from suicide. That would be about 330,000. And while I understand this is a really uncomfortable subject to talk about, it is absolutely crucial to break down where these numbers are coming from. I understand it's a conversation we don't want to talk about, but we absolutely need to. So, reading that number, it does sort of bring up the question, would those people have ended their lives regardless of access to a firearm? And I ask that question because upon further investigation of that number, I found in the CDC databases that 330,000 during that time was only half of the total. To put that into perspective, that would be every US citizen committing suicide. I believe that we need to focus our energy towards establishing the value of our own lives and making sure that the people within our circle see the value of their own lives before we talk about the issues of firearms. So my next argument is going to be the idea that gun control laws can prevent criminals from obtaining firearms. And while this, like the first, is true on certain occasions, it isn't entirely. And it's very important that we look further into it. So My first stat is going to be from an article written by Mark Fullman. He said that of the 62 shootings occurring from 1982 to 2012, 49 of those shooters obtained the firearms legally. And to further expand on the argument itself, I have a quote from John R. Lott Jr. He said that the problem with gun laws is that they take guns away from law-abiding citizens while criminals simply choose to ignore the laws. And I think that that quote brings to fact that there will always be an underground market for illegal things. You know, guns, drugs, and even alcohol during the Prohibition era. My last and final argument of the three is the idea that you, and when I say you, I mean the American people, are not a militia and the Second Amendment isn't for you. So I feel like we have to first establish the definition of a militia to really talk about the argument of itself. So I went to Oxford Languages and looked at their three definitions that they had for the word militia. Number one would be a military force that replaces the army during an emergency. Number two, a military force that engages in rebel activities in opposition towards a regular army. And number three, all able-bodied civilians that are eligible for military service. So now that we've kind of established the the definitions of what a militia is, I feel like we can really talk about it. So according to the second and third definitions, we could fit that. Obviously not everyone, but we could fit that. And if we could fit that definition, we could be eligible or a part of the Second Amendment. Obviously, that's not the only part of the Second Amendment, and there's much more to expand on there, but we do fit the militia segment of it. The problem with the Second Amendment is that the wording and meaning isn't concrete to anyone. It's constantly questioned and argued by both sides and sort of interpreted how people want to interpret it. It was revised in 1992. I was unable to find the original. You can take that how you want, but I'm kind of bothered by that. But obviously, just because the wording and meaning isn't concrete according to anyone, it isn't necessarily a solid argument. So, in conclusion, I listed off three of the most common arguments. Gun control reduces gun deaths. Gun control laws prevent criminals from obtaining firearms, and the idea that you aren't a militia and the Second Amendment is not for you. I hope I gave some insight and maybe covered an argument that you might have even heard or used or fought against depending on where you stand on the spectrum. Obviously, I can't cover every argument there is in 6 to 8 minutes, but I hope I gave you some helpful stats to make you want to further investigate and look into the idea. I hope that you go out and you further form your own opinions on the matter of gun control. Thank you. Like I said earlier, that is facing away from me. I was just using it as a stand.